There's probably a face you still remember, not because you knew them, because you didn't. A complete stranger, someone you saw for only a few seconds. Maybe in an airport, maybe at a grocery store, maybe crossing the street, maybe sitting across from you on a train. And yet for some reason you still remember their face, not their name, not their voice, just the feeling, the strange feeling that you knew them somehow. Maybe you even looked twice. Maybe you turned around after walking past them. Maybe you spent the next few minutes trying to figure out where you knew them from. School, work, social media, a friend of a friend. Nothing fit because the truth was simple. You did never met them before. Yet your brain seemed completely convinced that you had. And that is the mystery. Why can a complete stranger feel familiar? Why does your brain sometimes recognize someone you have never actually known? And by the end of this video, the face you are thinking about right now may reveal something much more interesting than the stranger themselves. So keep that face in your mind. We're coming back to it. The strange thing about familiarity is how quickly it appears. Before logic, before analysis, before certainty, the feeling arrives first. Imagine you are standing in line, waiting for coffee. Someone walks through the door. You glance up for a split second. You almost smile at them. That is how convinced you are that you know them. Then a second later, you realize you've never seen them before. Or maybe you are stepping into an elevator. A stranger walks in. Something about them instantly feels familiar. Not enough to start a conversation, but enough to make you wonder, where do I know them from? The interesting part is that your brain starts asking questions after the feeling appears, not before. First comes familiarity, then comes investigation. Your mind starts searching, school, old job, neighbor, someone online. You become a detective trying to solve a mystery your brain created. And what is fascinating is how confident the feeling feels. Because for a brief moment, it doesn't feel like a guess. It feels like certainty. Remember the face from the beginning, the one you've been carrying through this video. Why was your brain so sure? Your brain spends every second looking for patterns. That is one of its most important jobs. Recognize, predict, simplify. The faster it can identify something, the less work it has to do. Most of the time, that system works beautifully. You instantly recognize your home, your friends, your favorite restaurant, a familiar song, a familiar voice, but sometimes the system gets ahead of itself. Imagine walking through a shopping mall. Someone passes by. Immediately, your brain says, I know that person. The feeling is so convincing that you actually turn around, then reality catches up. Wrong person, yet for a few seconds, the certainty felt completely real. Why? Because your brain wasn't asking, do I know them? It was asking, where do I know them from? One question starts with uncertainty. The other starts with belief. And that is why these moments feel so convincing. Your brain has already decided something feels familiar. Now it is looking for proof. And here is where things become even more interesting. What if the face isn't what your brain is recognizing at all? Most people assume a familiar face reminds them of one specific person. But that is usually not how memory works. Think about how many faces you've seen throughout your life. Thousands, tens of thousands. Your brain doesn't store them like photographs in a filing cabinet. It stores fragments, pieces, patterns, details. Imagine sitting in an airport. You notice someone across the terminal. Something feels familiar. Maybe their eyes remind you of a childhood friend. Maybe their smile reminds you of a coworker. Maybe the way they carry themselves reminds you of a teacher. None of those similarities are obvious on their own, but together they create a feeling, a powerful one. And suddenly the mystery changes, because maybe the stranger doesn't remind you of one person. Maybe they remind you of many. Maybe your brain is combining dozens of tiny connections into one powerful sensation, familiarity. By now, the face you are thinking about has probably become a little clearer. Maybe you've already started comparing them to people from your past. Maybe you've started connecting dots. But there's still a bigger question. What if the face isn't what is familiar? What if it is the feeling? This is where things become surprisingly personal. Imagine meeting someone new. Nothing about their face stands out, yet something feels familiar. The way they laugh, the way they listen, the way they carry themselves, the energy they bring into a room, and suddenly you feel like you've known them forever. Why? Because sometimes your brain isn't recognizing appearance. It is recognizing emotional patterns. Maybe they laugh like someone you trusted. Maybe they speak like someone who once made you feel understood. Maybe they remind you of a chapter of life you've almost forgotten. Or maybe they remind you of a version of yourself. Suddenly, the face becomes less important. The feeling becomes everything. Because what feels familiar isn't always a person. Sometimes it is comfort, sometimes it is safety, sometimes it is belonging, sometimes it is a memory you can't quite reach. And that is why these moments can feel so difficult to explain. You are not recognizing a stranger, you are recognizing something they accidentally awakened inside you. Think about this. Two people can see the exact same stranger. One feels immediate familiarity, the other feels absolutely nothing. Same face, same moment, completely different reaction. Why? Because the familiarity wasn't inside the stranger, it was inside the observer. You brought your experiences into that moment, your memories, your emotions, your associations, your history. The stranger simply activated them. That is one of the strangest things about being human. We like to believe we experience reality exactly as it is. But we don't. We experience it through everything we've already lived. We're constantly comparing the present to the past, searching for patterns, making connections, filling in gaps. Most of the time we never notice it. Then every now and then a stranger walks by and we catch our brain doing it in real time. By now you've probably figured out who your face reminds you of, or maybe you haven't. Maybe the mystery is still completely unsolved. And honestly, that is what makes these moments so fascinating. The feeling can remain long after the explanation disappears. Think about how many strangers you've seen throughout your life. Most are forgotten instantly, gone within seconds. Yet every now and then, one stays. One face makes you look twice. One face creates a feeling you can't explain. And maybe that is because familiarity isn't really about recognition. Maybe it is about connection. Your brain is constantly linking the present to the past. People, places, experiences, emotions, versions of yourself, and every once in a while, those hidden connections rise to the surface, disguised as a stranger. Not because the stranger is special, but because something inside you recognized something before you understood it. Remember the face from the beginning. The stranger who somehow felt familiar, the one you've carried through this entire video. Maybe they didn't feel familiar because you've met them before. Maybe they felt familiar because part of them reminded your brain of something it already knew. A smile, a voice, a feeling, a memory, a chapter of your life, a version of yourself. Maybe that is why these moments feel so strange. Because for a brief moment a complete stranger seems to belong in your story, not because you know them, but because your mind is constantly searching the present for pieces of the past. And every now and then it finds one in a smile, in a voice, in a feeling, in a face, and for a brief moment someone you've never met feels like someone you've known forever. Maybe familiarity isn't something we discover in other people. Maybe it is something we carry with us. And every now and then, a stranger accidentally reminds us of that. And I can almost guarantee something happened while watching this video. The face became clearer, or maybe the mystery became even stranger. Maybe you finally figured out who they reminded you of, or maybe you've never solved it. So I'd love to know, who was that person? What made them feel familiar? And did you ever figure it out? Because almost everyone has a face like that. And maybe that is exactly what makes this experience so fascinating.